Hello, I'm Gary Stearman. You know, many subjects in the Bible are thought to be too difficult to understand, among them the book of Revelation, perhaps the geological history of planet Earth. Well, I don't think it's that hard to understand if you know where to look. And with us today to discuss these matters, we have Brent Miller. And Brent has, by the way, produced or co-produced Decoding the Future, which is a study in Revelation. But Brent, when you study Revelation, it actually takes you back across the entire Bible, right?
True. Revelation is the culmination of the entire Bible. It ties in with Genesis beautifully. Now,
we're going to start today by talking about the days of Noah. Jesus, talking to his disciples, and it's recorded in Matthew 24, said, "But as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man." In other words, as it was, and which then prompts us to go back and look at the days of Noah and find out how they really were. So let's talk about that for a little bit. We have the creation of man. We have the antediluvian civilization. And I think more and more is being learned about that time period. And you've done considerable research yourself. So let's talk about what interests you about the days of Noah.
Well, Matthew refers to the days of Noah in a generic sense. I believe there's quite a number of aspects to the days of Noah. What interested me initially was the scientific approach. What caused the flood? What does the Bible say what happened to the earth before and after the flood? That gives us clues as to what happened. Is there evidence today that supports the theory as to what caused the flood? And is there any prophecies as to whether that event will reoccur in the future? Because if the phrase, "as in the days of Noah," is true, very much all aspects of that time will be replicated in the future. And what I'm referring to specifically is we have come to the conclusion that part of one of these events is a pole shift that happened at that time, which was an instrumental part of the flood, which we feel the Bible supports it, and it also talks about an upcoming pole shift in the near future.
In other words, a pole shift then, which resulted in the flood. There'll be another pole shift in the future as described in Revelation.
Right.
But it will have a different effect than the one in the days of Noah. In fact, the Lord told Noah that he would never again destroy the world by flood, or by, I guess, totally covering it in water. But on the other hand, we read a lot of prophecy in Isaiah and other places that suggest a pole shift. I've got my Bible open here to Isaiah 24:20. "The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard." Well, that's a graphic description of something wobbling. And for something the size of the earth to wobble, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Tell us, what you see when you look at Scripture, both in Genesis and in Revelation.
Right, absolutely. The first thing is what you described. The type of pole shift we're talking about is not a magnetic pole shift, which scientists are saying the Earth flips on its north and south pole magnetic axis frequently. In fact, we have a wandering north magnetic pole. It's somewhere in the Hudson Bay right now. We're not talking about that type of pole shift. We're talking about a geographic pole shift, one that is incredibly dangerous to the earth. It actually shifts the entire planet, as you mentioned, Isaiah talking about the planet wobbling. So let's look at the days of Noah before the flood. We find that before the flood, there's a description in Genesis 2:6 that the whole earth was watered by a mist and that there was no rain. We know because of our axis shift today at 23.5 degrees, we have weather patterns, cyclones, tornadoes, we have rain all over the planet at any given time, lightning storms. They had none of this before the days of Noah. No rain. And it says specifically no rain fell on the earth, which means the whole earth was truly watered by a mist. The only way that could happen is if the axis of the earth was parallel to the axis of the sun. So as it spun on its axis in its rotation around the sun, it became a temperate climate from North Pole to South Pole. The entire planet was basically a paradise, a garden. There was no polar caps at that time. We also see another clue as to the pole shift is that when the flood came, Genesis tells us that the fountains of the deep were broken up. There is, of course, references to the firmament in the sky, so there is possibly moisture in the air or a canopy. There is a canopy theory, but we believe that the scriptures, even though that may have fallen, if there was a canopy, the majority of the water came from the oceans. Now, if you have a pole shift and physically, geographically shift the poles of the earth, I mean, grab the earth, shift it, it would not only wobble, but then stabilize at its current axis orientation of 23.5 degrees, but in the process, the centripetal force would slosh the water from the oceans around the planet. That there's more than enough water to cover every mountain on the planet. Now we look at Genesis and we see the effects of the planet after Noah. Mm-hmm. And we are clearly being told there is a rainbow in the sky, a rainbow that has never been seen before because there's a lot of moisture in the air. This was God's covenant to Noah that he would never destroy the earth again by a flood. Could he? Yes. The oceans are still there. He could, but he promises he won't. In fact, later on in the scriptures, we learn that he says that the next time he comes, he will destroy the world by fire.
Let's stop at rainbow for a moment, because a rainbow is very simply the sun's light being refracted through droplets of water that are suspended in the air. And as the angle between your eye and the sun changes, the color changes, and you get a bow shape, and everybody understands rainbows, I think. But it's what you said really strikes a chord, because there had never been a rainbow before, meaning there were no suspended moisture droplets in the air, and yet the earth was very, very fertile. It was watered constantly from beneath. But the whole atmosphere was then changed by the judgment that came upon the earth. The whole system was changed. The wind patterns, the tilt of the earth, the weather systems, probably the layout of the continents was shifted radically. And I think people say, well, okay, so that happened, ho-hum, what's next? But wait, you've done something that I think is very interesting. You have linked the days of Noah in the past with Jesus' statement, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. In other words, that whole system is going to be repeated in a slightly different way, but it's going to result in cataclysms nevertheless. And God promised Noah that he would never again destroy the earth by water, but on the other hand, he did say that there would be cataclysms. So let's discuss that a bit. There will be a period of coming cataclysms.
Right, there will be. And in fact, there's already scientists with satellite technology and our ability to scan the oceans and to learn more about our planet. In fact, we know more about outer space than we know about our own planet. Yeah. But when they turn their attention on the planet, we are finding things that are making scientists and geologists uncomfortable.
Well, let's talk about some of them.
Well, for example, they tend to wish to believe in anything that supports evolution or a slow evolution of the human species, not an instantaneous cataclysm that destroys all life on Earth and its reset, as in the days of Noah. So when they look at, for example, cities, huge intact cities on the bottom of the ocean, they don't know what to think. Now, for instance, Malta, the Bahimi Road outside Bahamas, there are two large cities outside the coast of the country of India. One of these cities has debris which has pottery, jewelry, and even human teeth. Now, these cities date back well over to the time of pre-Noah. These are pre-Noah cities. They are huge, massive cities. They could not be constructed by, cavemen with, picks and shovels and axes. These are cities that confound the scientists of the day. We have the Pyramid of Gizas, which we, are astonished at. These same pyramids exist on the ocean floor outside the coast of Japan, 311 miles of cities, complete with walkways, pyramids, temples, buildings, and none of these cities were destroyed by tectonic activity. It is as if hundreds of square miles slowly dropped into the ocean. Now, why would that be? The Earth's equator is slightly wider than it is on the North and South Pole, about 20 kilometers. All right, so you have, because of the centripetal force of the Earth revolving, it is slightly wider. If you change the orientation of the North and South Poles, geographic, you change the shape of the Earth. Cities that now were on land are suddenly at the bottom of the ocean without any tectonic activity because the bulge of the Earth pushes the new equator out. And land that was on the surface of the ocean now moves under the ocean. So scientists are finding these cities and they don't know what to do. In fact, the one that I just talked about off of the coast of Japan is so huge, they call it a megalopolis. The scientists actually, looking at the photos, looking at the pyramids, looking at the radar sketches, they actually step back and say, this can't be a city because it's impossible. It is bigger than anything that we could possibly create today, even ranging from New York to Boston. It's that size of a megapolis. And so they actually step back and say, we can't comprehend how this exists, but it has to be natural. Yet, there are streets, there are steps, there are buildings, and for all intents and purposes, it is a very advanced civilization that could have made it. Again, pre-Noah.
It conflicts with their uniformitarian ideas. In other words, the Earth is millions of years old. Any changes to the planet take place over millions of years. There are no sudden changes. And you seem to be looking here at something that marks a sudden change.
Yeah.
Where there was a huge city out on top of the land and suddenly it was underwater. And that's exactly, by the way, what the Bible says. In fact, in Isaiah, not only does the earth reel to and fro like a drunkard, talks about islands being moved out of their places. It talks about what we would call plate tectonics, shifting of geographic features on the surface of the planet. If the earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, that means that the poles would shift in some way, maybe reversing what happened in the days of Noah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
The idea of the 23.5 degree tilt of the earth.
Okay. What in the scientific community, scientists have long considered a pole shift and the implications of a pole shift. During the days of Noah, it was very clear what type of pole shift we are talking about, a geographic pole shift, where the entire planet actually moves 23.5 degrees, or the whole planet moves. In this particular case, it was 23.5 degrees. Now, there is a much, much, much more devastating type of pole shift that has never happened on the planet. It is a crustal pole shift. It is one where the axis of the Earth continues to spin the way it has been, but the entire outside crust of the planet suddenly shifts around the spinning axis. Now, remember when I said that the equator, wherever the equator is around the spinning axis, is about 20 kilometers wider? Well, as the crust shifts over this, the land literally has to rip apart in excess of 20 kilometers as it moves across the new equator and collapse back over. So it literally is going to rip apart most of the planet while this is happening. Let me read to you why I believe that the upcoming event is a crustal pole shift. Let me read to you out of Revelation 6:14 the actual description of this event. This is the opening of the sixth seal. And the heavens departed as a scroll when it was rolled together, and every mountain and every island were moved out of their place. What it's talking about is think of just a quick analogy. Islands and mountains as carrots. They're on the surface, but their base goes far underground. And if you chop off every island and every mountain, if you take this verse literally, everyone on the planet, and everyone is moved simultaneously out of its place, you have a crustal pole shift. The more liquid center of the earth, the mantle, is stationary, and the crust is being ripped away from the center mantle. This type of pole shift would create lateral forces all over the planet, collapsing buildings, collapsing infrastructures, causing tsunamis, generating an EMP pulse from the center of the earth, basically disrupting all of our communication satellites. GPS would be down, all of our power grids would disappear. There would be massive high winds and an exponential increase in earthquakes all around the planet.
And islands being moved out of their places, that's not as easy as it sounds, because if, for example, the Hawaiian Islands are above the sea, but they widen out under the water, and they're on a very firm base. Let's put it this way, they have a firm foundation. But the Bible says islands like that are going to be ripped away, literally removed from their connection.
In fact, the Old Testament refers to this as well. Like you mentioned, Isaiah 13:13 says that the earth will be moved out of her place, meaning it won't even be in the same orbit. Whatever causes this pole shift, this crustal mantle pole shift, is also going to alter the orbit of the earth. Isaiah 24, the earth will reel to and fro as a drunkard. It won't even have cycles anymore. If you were alive at that moment and you looked up in the sky, the sun is moving in this direction for a few hours, it slowly diverts and moves into a different direction. So this would be a horrible time. As far as anybody's concerned, it's the end of the world.
I want to stop you right there and go back to that subject about if you were on the earth in that day. You wouldn't be able to tell what time it was.
You wouldn't tell a time, and there's actually no day as well.
And I would, let's pursue that, but I want to break for just a moment and announce our premiere edition of the Prophecy Watchers. We're going to be publishing a magazine, and we are still offering, by the way, a lifetime charter subscription for your donation of $100 to Prophecy Watchers. And that lifetime means lifetime. And we're going to have great authors contributing to this magazine: Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, Avi Lipkin, Ken Johnson. We have even persuaded Brent Miller here to contribute an article or two. And by the way, he's a very good biblical researcher. Remember, that's the Prophecy Watcher. Check prophecywatchers.com, and you can find out all the details on the new magazine. Charter subscription, lifetime subscription for $100. That expires on August 31st, so do not delay. Now I want to go back, Brent, and this really interests me, because if the earth starts wobbling, everything that we use for timekeeping, which is the sun going across the heavens, suddenly is lost. Your time doesn't work anymore.
It's completely lost. Let's suppose you are living at that time, and somebody walks up to you, just hypothetically, you're living, and all of this chaos is going on. Of course, all of technology is gone. Somebody walks up to you and says, "What day of the week is it?" Clearly, there is no day of the week. The sun went that way, it veered to the north, and before it could set, it veered to the east, set for a little bit, then came back up out of the east. The earth is literally wobbling like a drunkard, and it is out of orbit. Now, so the person says, okay, forget that, that's too hard of a question.
Are you saying that no man knows the day or the hour?
No man knows the day or the hour. He'll ask you what time it is. There's no cycles.
Yeah.
So what do we have here? We have an event, literally an event that you could call nobody knows the day or the hour. An interesting part is that when Jesus was asked when would he return, he described such a scenario. Nobody will know the day or the hour. And we know that when he returns, he brings the wrath of God with him for punishment on the unrepentant world, which is after this.
that is so fascinating because we're all, anyone who studies prophecy is kind of a calendar nut, if you will. We all look for dates and times and anniversaries and things that will give us some reason to think that we're connected to the times and seasons. But in that day, literally, nobody will know the day or the hour. So during the tribulation, going up to the second coming of Christ, not the rapture we're talking about here, we're talking about the second coming of Christ. No man literally will know the day or the hour.
Will know the day or the hour. In fact, in the Old Testament, it does give an indication. It says that, and I will paraphrase, the Antichrist seeks to set the times and the seasons. He actually wants to create a calendar and set the times. He has to, because there is no calendar and there are no times yet. He doesn't have the opportunity to do that because Christ returns before he has the opportunity, before things stabilize, become cyclic once again, before he can create a new calendar.
Now, this brings us to the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ. And when John wrote this, John wrote about the future. He wrote about the day of the Lord. He wrote about the 7-year tribulation. He wrote about the seals. He wrote about the trumpet judgments, the vial judgments, or the bowl judgments, as some people call them bowls of wrath. Some people call them vials of wrath. But we're talking about something totally unprecedented here. But you make a great point, which we discussed before we came on today, and that is that what happened in the days of Noah is going to re-happen, but in a slightly different, even a reversed way. Explain that.
Yes, Gary. When God created the heavens and the earth, he did everything in a very specific, very precise order. The first days of creation created an order of creation. Even God himself has an order when he brings his wrath to earth. So after this event, after the opening of the sixth seal, we see that order starting to unfold. What is it that God also told Noah, or we find out later? We find out that God is going to send his wrath on earth and destroy earth, not by a flood, but by fire. So what do we see in the first 3 trumpets after the 7th seal is open? We see the first trumpet sounding, and fire from heaven destroys 1/3 of the land. That matches the 4th day of creation, where at the end of the 3rd day of creation, he has the seed in the ground grow. So an evening and the morning were the first day. So days start in the evening. The next day, where you have sunlight, you have the plants growing. So the 4th day of creation, 1/3 of it is reversed with the first trumpet. 1/3 of all the vegetation is destroyed. The 5th day of creation, where the fish and the sea life is created, that is reversed with the 2nd trumpet, where 1/3 of the oceans and life in the sea is destroyed. The 6th day of creation, where the creepy crawly things of the earth and all the land animals are created, that's reversed, 1/3 of it, in the 3rd trumpet, where asteroids, presumably asteroids, come down, fiery asteroids, and affect and poison 1/3 of all the fresh water. Well, mankind would be smart enough not to drink that. However, the animals and creepy crawly things of the earth would drink that, killing 1/3 of the mammals. So we see an order of creation, we see an order of destruction. And those parallels continue throughout the entire wrath of God sequence, resulting in the very final day where he, finishes Armageddon and sets up his throne in Jerusalem.
And to destroy the earth by fire, where would the fire come from? It says from the heavens.
The
biggest fire we know about would be the sun.
Correct. Yeah. If you actually look at the verse itself, let me go through that verse. The very first trumpet opens, Revelation 8:7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire with blood, mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and 1/3 part of the trees were burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. If you look at the actual wording, remember, if you look from a viewpoint of a Jew 2,000 years ago, he records exactly what he sees. Not in scientific terms, just what you see. Now look at this from a scientific viewpoint. Let's assume, make an assumption, you have a CME, coronal mass ejection, coming from the sun to hit the Earth. Plasma from the sun is viscous. Think of it as literally liquid fire.
Liquid fire, what a thought.
An
Wow.
analogy of like the lake of fire, the surface of the sun as an analogy. I'm not saying that's what it is, but if you have that heading toward Earth, it leaves the sun at about 2 million degrees. By the time it hits the Earth, they theorize it could be no less than 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, no less. Now, as the pressure wave, because it has mass, pushes through the atmosphere, the minus 150 degrees Fahrenheit of the outer atmosphere is hitting the surface of the stratosphere, freezing all the crystals. As the pressure waves push through, it creates ice, hail.
I can tell we're going to need more time to discuss this. Would you come back on another program? Well, I'd love to go through this whole thing in detail. But before that, I want to mention Decoding the Future, both in DVD and Blu-ray form, 7 DVDs, 10 hours devoted to a study of the book of Revelation like you have never seen in your life. It was, Brent, this is, you are to be congratulated along with others who produced Decoding the Future. I think it's the best study in Revelation for the man on the street that I have ever seen. If you go through these DVDs, you will live the book of Revelation. You'll understand what Brent really needs more time to talk about, and the documentation, the use of scripture, traveling to foreign lands where the things actually happened that are discussed in Revelation. This is just a phenomenal trip, and it's also a phenomenal educational tool. You want to understand Revelation? Go through Decoding the Future. 7 DVDs, 10 hours, yours for $149.95 in either Blu-ray or a standard DVD. And as a bonus, this Decoding the Future package will include what I consider to be one of the best produced movies on the Middle East that I've ever seen. A trip to the Middle East, it'll just blow you away. And it's called The Final Prophecies. Again, everything Brent Miller is connected with is first class, and it's just phenomenal. But we need to talk about this again. We're going to come back. We're going to do another program on destruction by fire, and you've got so much to say on this subject, I can hardly wait. So come back and visit us again.
Thank you. We'll
do it. I'm Gary Stearman. You know, we're living in the time when strange things, unheard of things, are going to become common conversation. So keep watching, everybody. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.